The gunshot cracked through the Wyoming Valley like thunder splitting the sky, and Tabitha Jane Jenkins knew before she even reached the cabin that something terrible was waiting inside. The wildflowers fell from her hands onto the dusty path as another shot rang out, followed by the sound of glass shattering. The late summer sun was still high over Fort Bridger, but fear wrapped around her like winter frost. Her stepfather had been drinking again. She could hear her mother crying. Tabitha was 20 years old, with honey-colored hair and blue eyes that had once held dreams of a gentle life. But dreams did not survive long under Vernon Jenkins's roof. Since her mother married him after her father's death in a mining accident, the cabin had become a place of anger and whiskey. She burst through the door. Vernon stood in the middle of the room, rifle in hand, swaying. The air smelled of gunpowder and cheap liquor. Her mother, Elena, was pressed against the wall, trembling. "You finally decided to come home," Vernon slurred, turning bloodshot eyes toward Tabitha. "Your mother just told me some interesting news." Tabitha's stomach tightened. She already knew what this was about. The town was small. Nothing stayed quiet. "What news?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. Vernon stepped closer, his breath hot with whiskey. "Doc Miller's wife said you've been to see the doctor. Said you're in a family way." The words hung in the air. Tabitha's hand moved to her belly without thinking. She had only confirmed it the day before. She had planned to leave town before anyone found out. She had not told her mother yet. "Who's the father?" Vernon demanded. "That Thompson boy or somebody else?" "That's none of your business," Tabitha said, lifting her chin. The slap came so fast she did not see it. Her head snapped to the side and she fell to the floor. Pain burst across her cheek. Before she could move, Vernon's boot struck her ribs. She curled instinctively, protecting the life inside her. "I fed you," he shouted, kicking her again. "Gave you a roof, and you repay me with shame." Her mother rushed forward. "Vernon, please!" He shoved Elena so hard she hit the wall. Tabitha tried to breathe, but each breath burned. Another kick landed against her side. She tasted blood. Her mind screamed only one thing: protect the baby. Then she heard heavy boots on the porch. The door crashed open. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice was deep and sharp as a blade. Vernon turned, surprised. A tall man stood in the doorway, sunlight behind him. A cowboy hat shadowed his face, but the steel in his voice was clear. "This is family business," Vernon barked. "Get out!" "Not when you're beating a woman," the stranger replied calmly. He stepped forward. In one smooth motion, his revolver was drawn and aimed at Vernon's chest. "Step away from her." The room went silent, except for Tabitha's ragged breathing. Vernon sneered, but let go of the rifle. "She's carrying a bastard," he spat. "Bringing shame to my name." "That gives you no right to touch her," the cowboy said, his voice low and steady. Tabitha looked up from the floor and saw him clearly for the first time. He was broad-shouldered, sun-weathered, yet with eyes the color of aged whiskey. There was anger in them, but it was controlled, focused. "Ma'am," he said gently to Elena, "gather what you need. You and your daughter are leaving." "You can't take them," Vernon growled. The cowboy cocked his pistol. "One more step," he warned quietly, "and you won't like what happens next." Elena helped Tabitha to her feet. Pain shot through her ribs, but she forced herself to stand. The cowboy moved backward toward the door, gun still trained on Vernon. As they stepped outside into the fading sunlight, Tabitha felt the first breath of freedom she had known in years. "My horse is at the livery," the stranger said. "Can you walk that far?" She nodded, though every step hurt. "Why are you helping us?" she whispered. He glanced at her, eyes softening. Some things a man can't ride past. At the hotel on the edge of town, he secured a room for them. He stayed in the one beside it. "If he comes looking," he said firmly, "he'll go through me." His name, she learned, was Daniel Quinn, a cattle driver heading south toward Colorado. That night, he brought water and witch hazel. With surprising gentleness, he cleaned the blood from her lip and bound her bruised ribs with strips of cloth. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "Heard the commotion from the street," Daniel replied. "Couldn't ignore it." There was something in his voice that told her this was not the first time he had stepped into someone else's fight. Morning came pale and cold. Daniel stood by the window, watching the street below. "I'm heading to a ranch 20 miles south," he said. "Friend of mine. Good people. Well, they need help. You'd be safe there." Tabitha looked at her mother. They had nothing left in Fort Bridger but fear. "We'll go," she said. By noon, they were on the road in a small covered wagon. Daniel kept the pace slow. He stopped often to check her bandages. Each time his hands were careful, respectful. For the first time since discovering she was pregnant, Tabitha felt something besides shame. Hope. By the third afternoon, they reached Blackwell Ranch. Rolling land, a sturdy log house, smoke rising from the chimney, a new beginning waiting in the valley below. Tabitha touched her stomach gently as Daniel helped her down from the wagon. She did not know yet how deeply their lives would become tied together. She did not know that the man who had ended her nightmare would one day change her entire future. All she knew was this: for the first time in years, she felt safe. Blackwell Ranch did not feel like the world Tabitha had known. The house stood strong against the wind, with clean windows, and warm light glowing from inside. Martha Blackwell welcomed them with open arms, her kind eyes soft the moment she saw the bruises on Tabitha's face. Josiah Blackwell shook Daniel's hand and said any friend of his was welcome. There were no questions that felt sharp, no whispers filled with judgment, only steady voices and warm food waiting on the table. That first night, Tabitha lay in a clean bed with fresh quilts tucked around her. The pain in her ribs still burned, but the fear was gone. Her mother slept peacefully in the bed beside her. It had been years since Tabitha had seen her mother rest without tension in her face. Daniel stayed the week to help around the ranch. Every morning he rode out with Josiah to check cattle. Every evening he asked Tabitha how she was feeling. His voice never held pity, only concern. "You're healing strong," he told her one evening as she sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed across the Wyoming sky. "Feels like I was trampled by a herd," she replied with a faint smile. He sat beside her, hat resting on his knee. "Bruises fade, strength stays." Those words stayed with her. Days turned into weeks. The swelling in her face went down. The deep purple bruises turned yellow, then disappeared. Her ribs still ached, but she could move again. She helped Martha in the kitchen, slow at first, then steadier each day. Her mother began sewing for the ranch hands, her needle moving with confidence she had not shown in years. But for the first time, Tabitha's pregnancy did not feel like shame. It felt like life. One evening, Daniel stood on the porch, twisting his hat in his hands. "I need to head back to Colorado," he said quietly. "Work's waiting." The words hit her harder than she expected. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow at dawn." She nodded, trying to keep her voice calm. "You've done more than enough." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "I'll be back in the fall. Josiah wants help with the roundup." "I'd like that," she admitted softly. He smiled then, slow and warm. Then it's a promise. The next morning she watched from the window as he rode away. Something in her chest felt empty. She told herself it was just gratitude, nothing more. Summer settled over the ranch. The Wyoming grass turned gold under the sun. Tabitha's belly grew round and firm. Martha watched her closely, offering herbs and steady advice. Her mother stayed close at night, when the baby kicked hard enough to wake her. In October, a rider appeared on the horizon. Tabitha knew the shape before her mind could catch up. Daniel Quinn had returned. He dismounted in the yard and removed his hat. His eyes widened when he saw her, round with child. "You look strong," he said. "I look enormous," she laughed. He shook his head. "You look alive." The roundup began. Long days for the men, late nights around the fire. Daniel moved through the ranch like he had always belonged there. The ranch hands respected him. Josiah trusted him. And every evening, he sought Tabitha out, even if only for a few quiet minutes. Then one cold night, pain gripped her belly like a tightening rope. But she gasped, clutching the porch railing. Daniel was at her side before she could call for help. "What is it?" "It's time," she whispered. The next hours blurred together. Martha took charge. Her mother held her hand. Daniel paced outside like a man fighting a battle he could not see. Near dawn, a baby's cry split the air. A son. Strong lungs. Dark hair. When Daniel stepped into the room, Tabitha held the baby close. Her arms trembled from exhaustion, but her eyes were bright. "James Daniel Jenkins," she said softly. Daniel froze. "Daniel?" "If you hadn't come that night," she said, voice shaking, "we wouldn't be here." He sat beside her, staring at the tiny life wrapped in blankets. When she placed the baby in his arms, he looked terrified for 1 second. Then something changed in his face. James's tiny fingers wrapped around Daniel's thumb. "He's strong," Daniel whispered. "He'll need to be," Tabitha replied. Daniel began staying longer at the ranch. Josiah offered him a permanent position as foreman, a small cabin of his own, a steady life instead of the open trail. One evening on the porch, Daniel spoke quietly. "I'm thinking about staying." Her heart beat faster. "You belong here." He studied her face. "And you?" "I belong where my son is safe." He hesitated, then said what had been building for months. A man can love a woman and her child without caring whose blood runs in the boy's veins. She looked at him sharply. "Daniel!" "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he said gently. "Just asking you not to shut the door." Before she could respond, a ranch hand came running toward the porch. "Why, there's a man at the house asking for you," he said breathlessly. "Says he's your stepfather." The air turned cold. Vernon. Daniel stood instantly. His eyes hardened in a way she had never seen before. "Stay here," he said. "No," she replied, holding her baby tighter. "I won't hide." She walked to the main house with Daniel beside her. Vernon stood in the parlor, older, thinner, eyes dull, but sober. "I came to take you home," he said. "This is home," Tabitha answered calmly. Vernon's gaze moved to the baby. "That's my grandchild." "No," she said firmly. "He's my son." Daniel stepped slightly in front of her without even thinking. For a moment, Vernon looked small, tired. "I handled things wrong," he muttered. "Been sober 3 months. Tabitha studied him. The fear she once felt was gone. "Well, you don't get to decide our future anymore," she said. Silence filled the room. Vernon finally nodded, shoulders slumping. "Then I reckon I'll leave you to it." When he rode away, Tabitha felt something inside her finally settle. Daniel turned to her slowly. "You're free now," he said. She looked at him, at the man who had heard her cry and broken down a door, and for the first time, she felt ready to open one. Winter came down hard on Wyoming that year, but inside the Blackwell Ranch, warmth filled every corner of the house. Tabitha would sit by the fire with baby James sleeping against her chest, watching snow fall past the windows. The wind could howl all it wanted outside. Inside, there was laughter, steady voices, and peace. Daniel had accepted Josiah's offer. He was staying. The first night he moved into his small cabin near the pine trees, he invited Tabitha and her mother over for supper. The cabin was simple but solid. A stone fireplace, a sturdy wooden table, curtains Martha had sewn. It smelled like fresh pine and clean beginnings. "You built this yourself?" Tabitha asked, running her hand along the smooth wood wall. Daniel nodded. "Every nail." She smiled. "It feels like home." Daniel's eyes softened at those words. James began fussing, and Daniel stepped forward without hesitation. He took the baby gently, rocking him with natural ease. James quieted almost instantly, staring up at him. "You've got a way with him," Tabitha said. Daniel looked down at the child. "He's got a way with me." Weeks passed. Daniel came to the main house every evening. He never pushed, never rushed her. And he helped with chores, fixed broken hinges, carried wood, played with James until the baby's giggles filled the room. The ranch hand started calling James Little Quinn without even thinking. One quiet evening, after her mother had gone to bed, and James slept peacefully in his cradle, Daniel stood on the porch beside Tabitha. The sky was clear and heavy with stars. "Tabitha Jane," he said softly. She turned to him. "I love you." The words were simple. No grand speech, no pressure, just truth. She felt her heart pound hard against her ribs. "I love you and that boy," he continued. "Not because I saved you, not because I feel sorry for what happened. I love you because you're strong, because you didn't break, because you fight for your child." She swallowed. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I trusted once before." Daniel stepped closer, but did not touch her yet. "I won't promise you a perfect life," he said quietly. "Just an honest one. I'll stand beside you. Every day." Snow crunched under their boots as she closed the distance between them. "I think," she whispered, "I've loved you since the night you walked through that door." Relief flooded his face. He cupped her cheek gently and kissed her. Soft, careful, like she was something precious. And she was. They were married in the spring under a large cottonwood tree near the ranch. Wildflowers bloomed across the hills. Josiah performed the ceremony. Martha cried openly. Her mother stood tall and proud beside her. James was in her arms when she said her vows. Daniel promised to love her, protect her, and raise James as his own. He never once said the word step. Their life did not become perfect. It became real. They worked hard, built their own small spread beside the Blackwell land, added cattle slowly, fixed fences, survived harsh winters and dry summers. James grew strong and bright. By the time he was 5, Daniel was teaching him to ride a pony in the yard. "Keep your back straight," Daniel called. James laughed as the pony trotted in a small circle. Tabitha stood on the porch watching them. Her daughter Sarah sat on the fence nearby. A baby boy, Michael, slept in a basket at her feet. Daniel jogged beside the pony, ready to catch James if he slipped. "That's my boy!" he shouted proudly. And it was true in every way that mattered. One evening, years later, Tabitha and Daniel sat on their porch swing while the children slept inside. Remember that night in Fort Bridger? Daniel asked quietly. How could I forget? She replied. I almost kept writing, he admitted. I was tired. Told myself it wasn't my business. She looked up at him. But I heard you cry out, he continued, and something inside me wouldn't let me ignore it. She reached for his hand. That was the night my life changed, she said softly. Mine too, Daniel replied. The wind moved gently across the Wyoming plains. The same land that once held fear now held family. Vernon never returned. Fort Bridger became a distant memory. What remained was this: a man who heard a woman's cry and chose to stop. A woman who found her strength in the middle of her worst moment. A child who grew up knowing love instead of violence. Tabitha leaned her head against Daniel's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. From pain had come protection. From shame had come dignity. From fear had come love. And every time she looked at her husband and their children running across the land they had built together, she knew one thing for certain. The commotion that night had